So we will skip the consent agenda, but I would like to go to agenda item 3, the proposed 2025 Funder Council meeting schedule. If anyone here has feedback, please provide it so we can take that into account. Hopefully, as people come in, we can get this passed. Any problem with these dates? Okay. All right. So hearing none, I think, this is what we'll tentatively put on the calendar until we can get it, fully approved by functioning Funders Council. All right. So we're going to move on to agenda item 4, the Funders Council elections, which we can't conduct because we don't have a quorum. I've reached out to a number of people to ask that they, to inquire if they could help fill some of these positions. So we have chair, vice chair, and secretary of Funders Council. We've been out without an acting chair since Duggan resigned. I worked with Chuck Lane with the city of Clearwater, and he was ready to step in, and then he left that position. We've had Elise Minkoff, who volunteered to chair, which was fantastic, and I think she'd do a great job. There's some nuance with her stepping in as chair as far as her ability to represent the Housing Authority and vote, as well as serve on the Funders Council chair. And so I'm going to ask the HLA to investigate how we might be able to accommodate someone in the position like Elise to serve as chair if we need to amend the MOU or the charter in some way that allows that. But if you can provide some feedback, either Megan or Victoria, about that before we talk further about who on this call or on our meeting here might be willing to step into any of those positions.
Yeah,
and
of
I
course.
see Elise is not here, so, but go ahead.
Of course, Arrow. Sorry, before I start, Arrow, did you have a question?
I just wanted to ask, I know we've got a couple other entities here and local governments. I know this has been an ongoing issue. I guess the kind of the bigger picture question, I understand, most of the providers are not necessarily local government bodies, so it might be different to have that providers chair serving on the CoC board, but I don't know if there's any thought to making the Funders Council be more advisory, and we also still listen in on the providers, right? And then we're providing advisory input versus a voting role on the CoC board. I don't know if there's any thoughts from anyone else on here, if they, if they think that might work better for what our role as Funders Council is. Like we'd make a recommendation on funding items to the CoC board, but not necessarily then turn around and be a voting member on those recommendations.
But we'd lose a lot of, votes, wouldn't we? I mean, county, city votes on the board of directors. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I'm saying right now, to my understanding, the Funders Council chair also sits on the CoC board and has a voting role. And that's been the issue, is that you have a staff member voting potentially in opposition to an elected official on the CoC board.
Mm-hmm.
Where like in local governments, we have like planning boards and citizen advisory boards that make formal recommendations to a council or commission, but they do not then turn around and vote on it as well.
Right.
And so I just want to ask, well, we've got some, I think we've got some county folks here, as well as some of the other, I think the VA is on potentially, and some others. What you guys think about that? I don't know if that would detract from our standing at all, but just wonder if that might help the issue we have.
Yeah, I mean, this is Karen. I can say, I've discussed this issue several times on this committee and a joint provide. That is the issue, is that at least for Pinellas County, our attorney, based on our policies regarding being on boards, we are not to be on boards where we're voting against one of our elected officials. And so we have a commissioner that's on the board. Right now, it's Commissioner Flowers. We have policies that prohibit that. So we do advise as staff. We advise our elected officials. So, I mean, I could see that working. I just don't know how it would work in the CoC structure, because then essentially there's no vote for funders. And I don't know historically if there was a lot of opposition between the funders and providers on like what items would be brought forward, but I mean, I could see this advising,
From my knowledge, I don't think there's been a lot of, disagreements about what's brought forward with the funders and providers. I mean, in fact, I think those are real collaborative and productive meetings, and people seem to be, have solid understandings there.
I think the joint meetings have been great. I think
Yes.
the issue is the CoC board.
Okay.
Because to my understanding, the chair of both providers and funders then takes voting roles on the CoC board. So they're like advising and then they're voting on their own advice. It's like a conflict. Now, for most of the providers, not all, but a lot of the providers are not elected bodies, but if they were, they already have an elected official on there. So I think they have a bigger pool of people that can serve as chair and not run into that conflict.
Okay. So the proposal would be to change the CoC charter to have the funders chair serve on the executive committee, but in an advisory way.
I would think about it almost like we do any of our other boards. Like the Funders Council makes recommendations. Those recommendations are passed on to the CoC board. Does that make sense? Like that chair runs the meeting, they could help make presentations to the CoC board on some of the recommendations and things like that. But
so then would you recommend that the funders chair not serve on the executive committee?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
And I brought it up, to get feedback from people from other agencies. I see Aaron's got his hand up on there, but just trying to work through this.
Aaron?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for recognizing me. I just want to make sure when you say serve, we're being very clear when we take this back to the HLA, because you could still serve but not vote, right? So I just want to, because the conflict would be the voting and the what small chance you'd be voting against your entity's interest, right? So you could serve as the chair of this council, then you have a seat on a board, an advisory seat that does not have voting power. I think that would clear the potential conflict. I think that's a great idea, Arrow. And Victoria, I think that is the conflict that you and I had been discussing before, and I do think that's a great idea, Arrow. And then maybe this kind of feeds into a larger conversation, Kathleen, that you and I are going to have is, what are the roles of the committees, of the subcommittees? Then what do they do? Do they vote on certain things? Do you make recommendations? You take that back to the larger board. And I think this is a great example of a recommendation that this committee would make, take it back to the CoC. We then look at the charter and the MOU to take this into action, which hopefully then means we could fill the seat by email, because I think the bylaws of this committee also allows email action, just like the providers. And we can maybe fill it even before the January meeting, but I think that's a wonderful idea. And thank you so much, Arrow and Chair Beckman. That would be great. Thank you.
Karen?
Yeah, I would have to just bring the serving part back to the county attorney, because we have a policy about serving on boards. So if we remove the voting capacity, I just need to run that by the county attorney, because staff typically don't serve on a board where there's an elected official for the county.
Got it. That makes sense.
Like maybe it's more kind of like how it's different committee report outs. at the COC, maybe that's the way to handle it, that it's not a position on the COC, voting or non-voting, but it's report out. So like you were just saying, Erin, that we have all these other subcommittees as well. So if they're giving an update on their committee, same with Funders Council, you know, on what our, you know, what we're looking at for possible funding opportunities. And here's, you know, some of the priorities that align with the joint funders providers priorities.
Here's the
you
funders
know.
report. Yeah, the funders
Yeah.
report is provided by, that's great.
I think that's good, but I think, you know, as being chair of the CoC executive committee, you know, we're lacking, we're losing institutional knowledge and people that, you know, we really need a funder there, I think, for perspective and for realistic expectations. If we just have the voice of providers there all the time, I think, you know, speaking for me, I want a funder there to help keep us grounded and realistic about, you know, key decisions and, you know, hiring decisions and all those kinds of valuation decisions, that a funder has a unique perspective, that really needs to be there, other than just equally with our other committees. You know, I just think that gravitas is needed at that level, even if it's just advisory and not voting.
That makes sense. I would concur with that. I don't know how you feel on that, Karen, if that's something to run back by legal, but kind of more of that technical advisory role almost from the funding side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to bring any of these recommendations back to our legal. I mean, it's about just serving on the board. So it's serving and voting. So if we're advising, you know, if it's sitting on executive committee and lending that perspective of the collective funders and weighing in and advising and not voting, because the executive committee still has the ability to vote on items when the CoC board cannot meet, right? And then it's ratified at the CoC board. So the funders advisor would not be able to vote as far as if it's a county. Now, if someone else steps in and can, great, but.
Right. Okay. I think that sounds like a good compromise. We keep your valuable knowledge and insight and perspective, but we don't have a voting conflict. And yeah, anyone else want to weigh in on that and what they're thinking?
Yeah, and I think, Victoria, can you remind me, one of the bylaws between these two committees says you cannot serve on both, which I think is something we need to address, because that can
Yes.
affect quorum.
Yes, the Providers Council, excuse my voice, everybody. The Providers Council charter does state that a voting member of the Providers Council cannot also serve on the Funders Council.
And so I think we need to either make some exceptions for certain entities, which makes sense to serve on both, without a doubt, including some maybe on this call. So again, we might need to look at some of the bylaws there, because that definitely would affect quorum and participations. And I think, Chair Beckman, to your point, some institutional knowledge makes sense on both of those committees. So that's something we might want to look at too.
Okay, great. We'll have legal do that as well. I've been remiss in, I know we haven't sent out a formal letter yet because there's a couple of little things that need to go forward. But for those of you that don't know, Erin Swift, who's on our call here on our meeting, was the former vice chair of the HLA advisory board, and he's now in the process of being confirmed, or you can explain it, Erin, of serving as our interim HLA CEO.
Yeah, sure. If you don't mind giving me the floor. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I think I've met most of you, or you've heard me speak on some of the task force meetings. As you know, we've had several CEOs in the HLA position the last several years. Rather than ready, fire, aim on hiring a new one, we've, as the board, decided to take a few months to do a couple of things. One is do a pretty involved 360 review of the organization itself, to see if there's some structural changes that need to be made before we hire another permanent CEO. Number two is work closely with the CoC board itself and the executive committee on if we need a new process to hire. So be working closely. And then I'm going to lead the search itself through this process, and also need to fundraise for that position a little bit, because we've identified doing some market research with other HLAs and lead agencies for similar counties around the state, Miami-Dade, Broward, Orange, with similar sized lead agencies. So I know it's awkward and we're very sorry, especially some of you stakeholders in the community without this announcement, but there's this really challenging threading the needle on. We have contract obligations. We can't make an announcement until I'm level 2 background cleared. But also there needs to be a CEO to form critical functions like approving timesheets. So the board had to make an emergency motion to make me acting CEO so I can do super critical functions like that. But we can't make an announcement because of certain contract obligations. So I've done my fingerprinting. As soon as that's done, the letter is going to go out. But my job is to work as close as I can with Chair Beckman and the CoC on hopefully just ushering in a permanent CEO that's going to be there for a long time to help this relationship. So thank you so much for Chair Beckman allowing me to have that floor. I have lived experience, which makes me super passionate about this. I was homeless in Pinellas County from the ages of 2 to 6. I'm now a business, owner in this community. I own a couple of law firms. I've been on the board. I'm taking a step back from my profession for a couple months to do this, just to lead this search and to just keep the organization floating until we can get a permanent CEO. Hopefully that will be in the position for a long time, because it's rough to have to do this search every year and we just want it to be successful. So thank you so much, Chair Beckman.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Good. I see some hands up. Megan, I see that we do have quorum, so that's fantastic. Was there
Yes.
anything else?
That was it.
Okay. And Karen, your hand's still up?
Yeah, and thank you, Aaron, for going over that. I would, I know you said you're going to work with the CoC. I would also recommend, I don't know what other agencies fund the operation of HLA. I know we do with Human Services, and I know I've reached out. I would also just kind of include soliciting feedback from funders of the HLA, in addition to kind of the CoC and executive committee.
Yeah, if I may respond to that, Chair Beckman.
Sure.
I plan to meet individually with all the board members, the HLA, the CoC, and all of you. So it's a 3-month contract position right now, consulting contract. I'm going to meet with stakeholders, law enforcement. I'd love to meet with each of you individually. In fact, I plan to, if you all will indulge me. So yes, again, my job is to be as all-encompassing as I can, to learn as much and to be a resource for all of you. So please, 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 please meet with me. I would love it. So thank you so much.
Great. Great. Thank you. Arrow.
I was just gonna say, I am glad to see kind of the pause to kind of reassess and make sure that they can have stability longer term. I know it's gotta be hard on the staff with the turnover they've had in the last several years. And so we're all pulling for you guys that it's a good process and comes out with a strong organization on the back end.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what we're all hoping and working towards. Yeah, we're determined. All right. Since we do have quorum and we are on the election agenda item 4, Victoria, I can turn it over to you and we can see if we can fill a couple of positions. So you can talk about that election process, and then we can go back up to the consent agenda and our calendar.
Absolutely, Chair Beckman. Again, everybody, I apologize for my voice, but I did want to, of course, mention that we need a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary for the Funders Council. So I'm not sure if Chair Beckman, do we want to proceed with elections today, or do we want to go back, get that advice and guidance from legal and from the board, and then come back once we've talked about the potential for the Funders Council chair to serve in more of an advisory capacity? happy to do whatever you would prefer.
Well, barring anyone who is, I think if anyone here today finds any of those positions attractive and you'd like to step up and do that, the secretary is not a minute taking position. It's more a formality of signing documents if necessary. And the vice chair is certainly there to support the chair. But any other clarifications on those positions, Victoria, before we, I think I'd ask if anyone here would like to before we move it to another meeting after we get clarification and maybe make that change.
Of course, that makes complete sense to me. With that in mind, I just want to review a few quick things about the Funders Council and about these positions. So per the COC, or sorry, per the Funders Council Charter, too used to saying COC Charter, per the Funders Council Charter, the Funders Council is responsible for making recommendations to strategically align funding resources available for homeless and at-risk programs and services to the COC board, responsible for making annual recommendations to the COC board on the best use of funds from specific resources to meet or exceed COC system performance standards. That's going to include the COC and State of Florida homeless funding and or local public sources. Also determining ways local funders can coordinate funded sources through common written standards, contract language, performance outcomes, and goals. I know that that is something that members of the Funders Council have been working on, and I thank you for that. And coordinating funding recommendations with other community-wide funding and planning groups. So that's a quick overview of what the Funders Council is responsible for. Leadership roles in the Funders Council, of course, include the chair, vice chair, and secretary. And the chair and vice chair will serve 2-year terms from January 1st of year 1 to December 31st of year 2. Elections are always held in December of year 2 for the following 2-year term. So here we are. This would be that December. We don't have anybody in term right now, but this would be that December. The chair is responsible for leading the meeting. Currently, the Funders Council chair also holds a seat on the CoC Board of Directors and the CoC Executive Committee. The CoC Board of Directors meets every other month in person, though virtual attendance has also just been permitted for quorum, so that is exciting. And the Executive Committee meets monthly, and those alternate between virtual and in person. If the chair is unavailable, the vice chair will run the meeting. The HLA will also work very closely with the chair and the vice chair to identify agenda items and to make sure that goals are recorded and whatnot for this council. The secretary is really responsible for leading the meetings and assisting the chair and the vice chair when they are not available and as needed. Currently, the secretary position is not a minutes taking position. This year, we were fortunate to hire a COC planning specialist, Miss Megan Robinson, who you've all gotten to know. And Megan has become a pretty expert note taker, so she is responsible for that. Before we proceed, does anybody have any questions about the role of chair, vice chair, or secretary of the Funders Council? Okay, not seeing any. I would love to welcome nominations from the floor. We have not received any nominations before, but that's okay. It is never speak now or forever hold your peace. Until we reach a deadline, that is. So please go ahead and let's put those nominations forth. Do we have any nominations for the role of chair of the CoC Funders Council? Arrow, you have a hand up.
I would like to nominate Janine Evoli if she's willing.
All right, we have one nomination for Miss Janine Evoli. Do we have a second for that nomination?
I'll second.
All right, excellent. So Arrow made a motion and Karen seconded. Thank you. Miss Janine Evoli, would you like to respond to that nomination?
Yeah, at this point, I I understand that it requires a lot of time and work, and I'm just not so sure with my other responsibilities that I can currently um, have the additional time to devote to it right now. I appreciate the nomination. I also feel like I'm still one of the relatively new folks on the board, and with all of the leadership changes, I'm still trying to kind of get a real good sense of the various roles and relationships and the various funders. We do fund some um, homeless services, but it's specific to our St. Vincent de Paul and rapid rehousing and the shelters. So it's a little different from some of the jurisdictions that are providing more extensive funding. So I feel like I'm not quite as knowledgeable about that piece.
Well, I think you'd have all the other experts on the committee that would help, help fill in those gaps. It's really leading the meetings and working in conjunction with the HLA to set the agenda and, fulfill the requirements of the charter. But I think what's important is, and you all know better, you can jump in, but, to just make sure that we have, and this is more of a function of the entire CoC, but that the funders understand, the priority populations that have been articulated and agreed on, voted on, and that we have a strong ask of those funders when it comes time for budgets about what the needs are in the community. And this is the data that backs it up so that we can really, maximize the impact, the positive impact that we have. And we're all rowing in the same direction. But yeah. Anybody else can chime in, Victoria or Megan.
Ms. Avoli, do you mind if I ask a question? And of course, feel free to say no, not yet, but would you feel comfortable taking the role of chair, accepting this nomination, if a vice chair with some of that jurisdictional knowledge was elected?
I think I would like to hear the results of you guys looking at the charter and any adjustments before I make any commitments at this point. Like I said, I know my workload is pretty high right now, and I just would really want to have a good sense of what I am committing to and what the requirement might be, both in terms of time and function. So I just feel like there's quite a bit up in the air. And I feel like until we have some clarification, I'm not really sure how much time and energy and exactly what that role would look like.
Perfectly understandable and fair. Absolutely respect that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for considering it. We really appreciate it.
So at this time, is it okay, Ms. Avoli, if we note that in the records at this time, you have declined the nomination?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Victoria.
Of course, and thank you for the
Chair Beckman.
consideration.
Chair Beckman, I had put something in the comments. We had talked about in one of the meetings when we were discussing these positions, potentially seeing if the extra roles serving on the extra boards could be divvied between chair and vice chair so that it's not so time intensive that it's deterring people from that position. I don't know if that's feasible or not, like one to do CoC board and one to do executive board or something like that.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. That's a fair question. And I think that's a fair request. Yeah. We can consult with legal or whatever about the MOU or the funder's charter and get that clarified. Sure. Karen?
Yeah, I think the discussion, and this was when Chuck Lane was kind of considering it, it was even beyond the chair and vice chair. So I think it was that other members would also be able to sit on various things. So I know I volunteered for rank and review. I think Joe Riddle volunteered for rank and review. So it really was taking a look at the commitments, knowing that the voting kind of was the issue for many of the government jurisdictions that serve on this, And we all kind of committed to taking pieces off of the chair and vice chair if they were able to sit on the board and do that voting capacity. So I just want to make sure that the notes reflect that it was several members of committee said that they would volunteer to take the workload off because we were acknowledging the voting and serving was the issue.
Good point. Thank you. Okay. All right. So Victoria, you're going to go back any kind of, go ahead.
Absolutely. So thank you everybody for that feedback. I really sincerely appreciate it. We are going to be doing, we will reach out again. I know that these issues have been asked in the past, but it is always worth going back and asking again. So we will go back to the executive committee and to legal, and we will ask these questions again, and we will bring back the answers. And hopefully we have some good guidance moving forward. Now, do we have any other nominations for the role of chair? I'm not hearing any. Those of you who have been in point in time trainings with me know that I can sit in an awkward, uncomfortable pause for a really long time, but I'm not going to force everybody into that today. I guess moving forward, we'll look at the role of vice chair. Now, this role, vice chair, this person is to support the chair. The vice chair does not have a dedicated seat on the CoC board of directors or executive committee. So at this point, if this person were elected into the role of vice chair, and we're not able to commit to the CoC board or CoC executive committee, I do not think that you would be on the hook for quite all of those meetings. We would ask that you participate in the CoC board meetings as possible. They're only bi-monthly, just until we get a chair, so that you can provide that critical council update. So the roles of the vice chair, just to review, are to support the chair and to lead meetings when the chair is unavailable. Currently, we are in a climate where the chair is unavailable, so we would lean on this vice chair to lead meetings and to work with the HLA when it comes to setting agendas and trying to communicate with council members on important issues, things like that. We would also ask the vice chair, just for the time being, to participate in board meetings as possible, to be part of those critical council updates. This would not be a voting board seat, but having the participation is very important. Before we proceed with nominations, are there questions about the role of vice chair, which again is also a 2-year term? Karen?
But they do vote if the chair cannot be present. So I think, right, so if the Funders Council chair cannot make the CoC board, the expectation would be the vice chair is there and votes on behalf of Funders Council, correct?
The dedicated seat for the CoC board of directors is for the Funders Council chair. It is not a chair for the vice chair. So I would have to go back and double check the charter. I'm not going to answer a legal question as a non-lawyer, but I'm going to say that I am fairly certain that would be a non-voting seat for the vice chair, because it is the funders chair's seat. So you actually, as vice chair, would not have a dedicated seat on the board of directors. You would be at the table to provide updates from the Funders Council.
I think that distinction we need to hear about, because I thought I remembered when Duggan was the chair and Teresa Jones was the vice chair. I thought Teresa voted when Duggan could not be there. I don't know if Helen, if you remember that.
Yeah, I just raised my hand because I think that is the case.
Yeah.
Otherwise, besides just giving information, there would be no reason to be there. And I think to your point earlier, that's kind of why I have backed off from being chair or vice chair, is because I have an elected official sitting at the table. And so, yeah, but Teresa did vote, but also remember that Teresa was a part of CoC, not from the city point of view, but a personal. So that was different. But yes, in that case, she did.
I am pulling up the CoC charter right now, just so I can review that board seat. If the board seat is solely for the chair of the Funders Council, and if it does not say vice chair, let me see here. No, it is Funders Council chair is the dedicated CoC board seat, and that is an appointed seat. So the vice chair would not have a vote on the CoC board of directors. And per the discussion surrounding designees that has happened at the CoC board level over the last few years, no organization is able to appoint a secondary person to go and represent them on their behalf at an individual meeting. That would be the same here. That would apply here. So under all of that, the vice chair would not have a vote at the CoC board meeting. I can again run that past the attorney, and if you would prefer, we could even do a vote today pending the attorney's agreement that this is a non-voting seat at the CoC board of directors. But per the CoC charter, this should not be a voting seat at the CoC board. I really hope that that answers the question well, and I'm happy to provide a copy of the charter or answer any additional questions.
That the version of the Funders Council charter that I have, it looks consistent with that too, where it just says the vice chair will run the meeting. It doesn't say about serving on any other.
Thank you, Arrow. So with that in mind, is the council okay proceeding with a vote for the vice chair? And what we can do is, if the person who is nominated needs us to, we can reach out to the CoC's attorney, Mr. Charlie Curtis. We can verify with him that this is not a voting seat, and the vote that we take today can be pending that confirmation, if that's what the council would like to do. Karen?
I'll just say I can make a motion to move forward, and Arrow, don't kill me, but I would probably recommend you as the vice chair. I feel like you have such knowledge of the system. You're a sound thinker. You listen to others at the table. You have a large breadth of information regarding kind of being a HUD entity. So you would be my recommendation. And again, I would say I would offer to support in other functions, but you would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much, Karen. So there is a motion for.
I second that.
Oh, thank you, Helen. So Karen has made a motion to nominate Arrow Woodard as vice chair of the CoC Funders Council, pending the attorney's agreement that this is a non-voting participation, not even seat, participation in the CoC Board of Directors. Arrow, would you like to respond to that nomination?
I was hoping we'd have someone else be chair, and then I'd be okay with vice chair. But I think what you're stating, just to help kind of set agendas and so forth in the interim, I would be accepting of that, hoping that some of my fellow colleagues on here will step up for that chair position once we get the pending or the decision on if we can change that chair role on CoC. So I guess.
All right, so for the record, Ms. Arrow Woodard from the City of Largo has accepted the nomination for vice chair of the CoC's Funders Council. Thank you, Karen and Helen, for those nominations, and Arrow for that acceptance. Do we have any further conversations or questions regarding this nomination?
I'd just like to say thank you, Arrow, for agreeing to be voted on for vice chair. I think you'll make it incredibly attractive for someone to serve as chair, to know that you're there to help, and all the things that Karen said, your institutional knowledge, your willingness and abilities to work with people, and your level-headedness is a fantastic asset. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, with that being said, we did have a motion and a second. So I think it is time to go through the vote. Since we are online, I think that we're going to need to do this by a roll call vote. Megan, if you could pull that up and could you go through the list?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Okay. Chair Kathleen Beckman.
Do I have a vote? Because I'm not part of
Oh,
the Funders Council? I don't think I do.
As interim chair, we had listed you as a voting member as interim chair.
Okay, well, yes.
Karen Yatcham.
Yes.
Okay. Joe Riddle.
Yes.
Okay. Janine Evoli.
Yes.
Helen Rhymes.
Yes.
And Blossom Capper.
Yes.
Okay. And Arrow would not vote for herself or
She would.
sorry. Oh, she would. Okay. Not sure of the process. I'm sorry. Arrow
Yeah.
Woodard.
That's weird, but
Yeah.
sure, yes.
Okay, that's everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for that vote. All right, moving on. We have the vote for secretary. The CoC secretary, as we've mentioned, is responsible for assisting the chair and the vice chair as needed when they are not present leading the meetings. This individual would not be asked or expected to participate in CoC board meetings unless the chair or the vice chair weren't present and the chair or the vice chair needed the secretary to go and give that update to the board. So this is really a position responsible for helping direct the future of the Funders Council. Again, Megan is there to take minutes, so right now that's not a concern for the secretary. Do we have any questions about the role of Funders Council secretary? Okay. Not hearing any. Do we have any nominations for the role of Funders Council secretary? Not hearing any, I'm going to throw out there that this might be a good opportunity for folks who really want to help support the chair and the vice chair, but definitely do not want, to have to participate in very many board of directors meetings. This would be a great way to offer that support in a structured fashion. Any nominations? Okay. Not hearing any, I'm going to ask that everybody in this call please consider the roles of chair and secretary so that these can be voted upon during a future meeting. These positions are very, very important. So please consider taking them on at a future date. So I think unless Chair Beckman, you had anything else you wanted to add, that will close our votes for today.
All good. Thank you. I appreciate Arrow, you agreeing to serve as vice chair, and look forward to getting clarification on a change to allow an advisory role for the chair, and then we'll move forward. So more to come, and hopefully sooner rather than later. Thank you. Do we want to go back up to our consent agenda and the meeting schedule, Victoria? Thanks. So the consent agenda was attached. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes and attendance?
Motion.
Okay, motion in a second.
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 Okay.
Go ahead.
Yo, you got that? Whatever you need, Victoria, about who seconded? You good?
I'm sorry, Arrow made the motion. Who was the second?
I made
I
the
did.
motion.
Oh, Karen made the motion,
Yeah.
and then Arrow seconded. Perfect.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All those voting to approve? Aye.
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 Good. Any opposed? Good. All right, let's take a look at the proposed 2025 Funders Council meeting schedule. And do we have a motion to approve that?
Motion to approve.
Thank you,
Second.
Karen. And second, Joe. Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, good. Thank you for doing that. So we've got the minutes approved and the schedule for next year set. We have our vice chair, which is fantastic. More to come on the roles of the chair and to solicit a secretary. We have priority populations and an intervention survey that I think Victoria or Megan are going to lead us through. This was discussed at Friday's Providers Council meeting, which I attended as well, and I think Aaron was there as well. So there were some modifications made, and Megan and or Victoria will lead us through this discussion.
Hi again, everybody. So during the September joint meeting, there was a discussion about the need to begin identifying priorities for 2025. So we hoped to start this process in October, but due to scheduling conflicts, here we are starting it now. So the survey that went out is really just to begin the discussion. This is not a survey that is intended to be, published everywhere. This is just a survey for the councils to begin thinking about priorities in 2025. So the Providers Council did want to make some changes to this survey. And so what Megan is showing on the screen here is the updated version of this, and we will send the updated draft version out to all council members in this meeting immediately following this as well. But we're going to start here by asking about, just some basic information about you and your organization. And then Megan, if you can scroll on down. And of course, by the way, this is going to be a digital survey. It's not actually going to be a paper survey when it's finally completed. Then we're going to review priority interventions. And there are obviously a number of intervention strategies available here. Then we are going to ask about effectiveness in interventions, gaps in services, system inequities and disparities, and how we can potentially address these. And then we are going to ask some final thoughts. And along with this survey, there will be the HMIS data dashboards, the 2024 PIT report and data dashboard, the first contact data dashboards, as well as the 2024 priority populations and interventions that were identified. So again, the idea here is really just to begin identifying priorities so that we can begin discussing them as a collective. So Chair Beckman, you have a question or a comment?
I did, and I think what's most important, this was brought up first thing on Friday, was that the language was establishing priority populations and interventions for 2025. So certainly we're not establishing the priority populations; those are already established. So that was like right out of the gate what the providers had said. So on the attached copy, I think that you got, the whole section 2 of which population should be the top priorities for CoC resources in 2025 was all taken out. So that's what's been edited out of this one. And also number 10 on the last page, which was are there populations in Pinellas County that are currently underserved? Well, I think we can argue they're all underserved. We everybody needs money and a lot more resources. But the other thing that you had mentioned in today's meeting here that maybe I didn't catch in Friday's meeting is that along with this edited survey, you're going to have data from 211 and PIT and HMIS. And I would ask that when you're attaching that data, it's like a one pager of the highlights, not just a link to the whole, I don't know, 140 page PIT report or something, so that you've distilled it down to, key bits of information that are crucial for our understanding going forward for the priority actions. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And Megan, if you could please go back to the agenda packet, I would appreciate it. Thank you. We did make sure that the links to those dashboards were included in the agenda packet just so that everybody has them today. So if you look at the packet, and we'll make sure we send this information back out with the email. But if you look at the packet, you do have the link to the PIT report, the full PIT report, of course, but the data dashboard as well, which does have that condensed information, as well as the HMIS dashboards and the 211 dashboards. We asked this question of providers, and we weren't immediately given any, but we are expecting some in email. Is there information that this group would like us to pull specifically from HMIS to review priority interventions?
Or, yeah, is there anything from, you asked providers, but the funders, anything from funders that you think we're missing or we need, a one pager on some key data?
Well, I'm just wondering with the questions too, this came up last year that we set the priority populations, and then I think St. Vincent de Paul brought up like, okay, if it's not specific to this, it's going to completely negate us being able to get this funding for veterans or whatever. So I'm wondering if there's a question, do you have, or what funding sources do you have that are specifically tied to serving certain populations?
To your populations, right?
Yeah, like which populations, are they specifically linked to specific ones? Because then we'd also know kind of in the system too, like which ones are really already divvied, so we could see what the gaps are. And then also, we're still adjusting from COVID money going away and ARPA ending. And maybe a question about what, with those funding sources ending, what are the most significant gaps, like the top, the top 3 biggest gaps or something that you're seeing for service? Because I did notice on the HLA dashboard for data, just on a quick search on the quarter, it looks like the recidivism rate, even though it's a lower amount of clients served, the recidivism rate is higher for rapid rehousing right now than emergency shelter. I did the calculation right. So to me, that's saying maybe like the case management money after people are housed is not at the level we need it to be if we're not keeping people housed through rapid rehousing, or it's a significant mismatch that there's not PSH, and so we're putting people that need PSH in rapid rehousing and it's causing it too. But just thinking about if they could maybe let us know what the big impacts are of that funding going away.
That's an excellent point. It really is. I mean, we need to know because people have been shouting about that it's gone. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to put in the chat the questions there because I want to make sure that I'm getting them right. But Arrow, please correct me if this is wrong. Does your organization have any funding sources that are tied to specific populations? If so, please list them. And with COVID and ARPA funding sources ending, what are the 3 biggest funding gaps for service?
Or how about is your organization impacted by COVID and ARPA funds and their expiration? And in what way? You know what I mean?
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And then Aaron, it looked like you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I want us to be thinking about a process by which we're going to have to go back to the Providers Council to get approval on these changes so we can get this survey out as quickly as possible, correct? Chair Beckman and Victoria?
Yeah, I would think so. I would think an email,
Yeah.
they should be
Yeah.
fine with that change.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed, yeah, because
Yes.
we want to get this out as soon as possible. Yeah, so let's get this language approved by this group and then so we can get it out to that group. Thank you. And these are excellent changes. Thank you so much, Arrow and Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I have put those 2 additional questions in the chat just in case anybody has notes on the wording. But are there any other notes or questions about this project? Or is there any specific data that the Funders Council would like us to pull relative to this?
Does Pinellas County Schools have specific data, like a one-pager of data that they might be able to share that's, you know, specific to children and families?
We can certainly ask the HEAT team if they can provide us some information.
Mhm.
Pinellas County Schools does require an IRB process for some intensive data reports, but we can
Mhm.
certainly reach out to the HEAT team to see if they're able to provide some data.
Okay.
So we had a good presentation by Suzanne the other day for Built for Zero. I'm just wondering how we bring that to the forefront, if that is going to be like, here's our priority. And then if there's other things we definitely need to consider as part of that priority list. And then also the PIT report had recommendations too for need for more medical respite beds, and
Mhm.
also mentioned about family support services for an increasing number of people under 18.
Karen?
Yeah, and I haven't clicked on all of these different links, but does the waiting families with children waiting for shelter, is that captured in one of these? Because we used to get updates on that pretty regularly at funders, at providers. I know that that was what was helpful last year in, I think Kathleen, you sent the letter out on behalf of the CoC that the greatest priority was shelter for families with children. But I don't know if that's captured in any of these different links. And I know we used to talk about that number in every meeting, and I don't
Right.
feel like we've talked about that number.
No, used to be like in the 140s, but yeah, I don't know, right. That should be a top of top of the line reporting out, you know. Yeah, I
Without
agree.
it, we can't really say families with children needing shelters are number one if it's 0, you know, and which I'm sure it's not 0, but.
Right. But what's that wait list? Yep.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we will ask the HEAT team if they can share data with us. We will add very specifically the PIT report recommendations, and we will pull Built for Zero recommendations and priorities, and then we will pull, and we'll just make it very clear, we'll pull the family shelter waitlist number, and we'll make sure that we have that there. And then I can also ask Suzanne for some updated coordinated entry numbers to make sure that those are included as well, if that is also information that this group would find helpful.
I'm only seeing Karen's, but I thought you know, I don't have the full, but Karen and Arrow want to go first if you've got your hand up.
Karen, go ahead.
I just wanted, I was in providers, you know, I'm there as a contributing member, but can we just go over the timeline again? Because I know that this has been pushed out a little bit, and just for, you know, reference, our budget kickoff is the 2nd week of January. So I just, if we can go over the timeline of when we would expect to get these results back.
Absolutely. So at Providers Council, the request was made to have this completed by January 5th. So we would be working to get this out and get this approved as quickly as possible so that we can get the results back by January 5th. I did, looking at the calendar today, notice that January 5th is a Sunday. So I have written it, and I've just amended that to 9 a.m. By the 6th to make sure that we have it on that Monday. But that was the timeline discussed in Providers Council.
Well, can I just ask, so the CoC board meeting is on January 3rd, or was that been moved?
The 10th.
It's the 10th now. Okay, so the idea would be it would be in by the 6th, voted on at the 10th, and then a formal letter would come out like last year. from
So,
the chair.
so this would have to go first as a survey to the group. Then we would come back in a joint meeting to discuss. And the intention was not to send this to the board in January. When discussed at the September joint meeting, the timeline was to get this finalized and approved during the May Board of Directors meeting. But to begin that discussion so that we could have a joint meeting, the Providers Council had talked about adding an extra joint meeting to make up for the October canceled one in January, so that this conversation after these surveys were completed could be brought back as a discussion. Because keep in mind, this survey is not being used to finalize priorities. This survey is being used to begin the discussion so that Providers Council and Funders Council can come together and discuss priorities and then make formal recommendations from there.
Okay, so I just want to acknowledge, I think I thought I heard it differently. I thought at Providers Council on Friday, but I thought the idea was to get priority interventions to funders ahead of budget development so that if there is available funding, we could shift or, look at other options. My budget is probably going to be due in February, like end of February, probably the early March at the latest. But that's only for the county, so I'm not speaking for the other entities.
I can speak for, that's the way Clearwater operated. They hit the ground running in January. Arrow.
One clarification, maybe that would be at that other meeting too, to have is with the Built for Zero. I think on that meeting we had lists on the other day, it was unclear if it's chronic individuals or if it's like, did it exclude, or was it chronic individuals and like non-veteran individuals, or is it all chronic homeless population, families, individuals, including veterans? So I don't know if that nuance is going to come out through this. And then with that, Erin, I think we also need to know internally kind of an overview of the organization. I know things have shifted back after COVID, where you guys kind of expanded your actual service provision during COVID, and some of that's retracted. But I think to Karen's point too, like understanding, what services HLA is providing and what the funding needs are if there's any requests. Because we give a little bit, but we haven't heard in like 4 years probably any request for any change to that amount or anything. So that would be helpful for better.
Helen?
Matt.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Aaron. You can respond. Sorry.
Yeah, if you don't mind, if I may respond to that. Yes, Era, thank you so much. That is 1,000,000% part of this transition period for us too, is to kind of structurally look at, because HLA has expanded quite a bit in the last 3 to 5 years, especially over COVID. I mean, even coordinated entry has expanded quite a bit at what we do with HMIS. And I think that's going to be part of this review process, is even some independent fundraising, because HLA is doing so much more service providing, like you said, exactly right. So this survey, I think, is a beautiful example of, let's use this as an opportunity to learn. What are we doing, right? So this survey, there was an idea in September, then the October meeting got canceled. Now it's been this pregnant pause of what are we doing with this thing? And this now, let's learn from it. So we can get it out. It can have answers by January. And now we're not going to have an opportunity for the larger body to vote. And it certainly can't be anything official, probably by way of what the committee is supposed to do, make a recommendation, take it to the body, make a vote. But it can be guidance, and it can be used to make recommendations, to take back to your bodies, to your organizations, to make funding decisions. Absolutely. But is it going to be voted on by the 2 committees to take it to the CoC by the EC? No. But I think this is a beautiful example of, what does the HLA do? What is this survey doing? And I just think we're going to use these next several months as an example of how does this fit into the greater puzzle? And part of that is the HLA has expanded in its budget and its functionality and its, just scope. And we want to figure out the puzzle pieces better is probably a good answer. So I think let's use this as an opportunity. So that's probably the best I can say. Thank you.
Helen?
So I think Karen kind of hit on a lot of what I was going to say, is that our budget process will be starting in January with our kickoff and then February. But what I did hear at Providers Friday was that we're pretty settled on the priority population. So that was a lot of work that we all went through to get to those priority populations. And so they're wanting the interventions. I really think that this will probably guide us for 2026, maybe, unless something drastic happens in 2025 and we need to redirect ourselves as a system, like we did when COVID happened and there were a huge explosion of families. But for this, we look for this guidance not only for our budget, but also for like our social action funding that comes out in May and all of those things. So I think the sooner that we can get those interventions and determine as a system whether or not we're going to use the populations and or interventions as what is our priority that we need right here. Do we need more funding for rapid rehousing, or do we need more funding for shelter, or which are two totally different things that will help us to get our social action funding application, which goes out in May, right? And so if this doesn't go to CoC until May, to board of directors until May, then we probably will not have that information, and we'll be using last year or this year's priority population. So I just want to make that clear for us. And I know we do a lot of we do fund HLA, and we fund a lot of the smaller agencies, or all of the agencies really, out in the community for social action funding. But if we do not have the intervention set, we will have to use our priority populations that we have set right now. And then Arrow, to your question that you had, I remember in Built for Zero, it was chronic homeless. Families were not a part of that. So whether or not we include veterans or not, I think that's up for discussion. But the way that the Built for Zero team, the way that they look at it, they do not include families.
Thank you. I didn't remember families being part of the priorities for Built for Zero. It was more that chronic. And really, I haven't had, it was Amy who led those conversations a lot on the Built for Zero, I thought. But is there no way that we can, if Victoria's asking for this survey back by January 6th at 9 a.m., they compile some data, that we can have recommendations, a discussion and recommendations of, the interventions, to make a recommendation to the board of directors on the 10th, and they can just vote on it as, we approve and acknowledge these recommendations from the joint providers and funders of the CoC as our lead agency, our funders, the county, the city, looks at their budgets for the next fiscal year. I just think we need to get that information in their hands in January.
And Chair, again, I won't speak as an attorney, although I am an attorney. The way bodies are supposed to act is this product would be a product of these two committees combined, the funders and the providers. So it would normally be first that the data compiled by these two committees, it would be a recommendation of these two committees to then go to the CoC board, so there's just not a lot of time to then go to that by the 10th. Now, by a lot of effort, it could. And if it's important enough, maybe it should be, right? So yes, and maybe everyone makes it happen in that short period of time, and it could be by the 10th, but it would just take a lot of effort. So yes, it could be done. There's 5 days to make that happen.
I just wanted to bring up too that point in time count is in the throes of
That's-
everything. Then all the training, everything. Victoria's screen was off, but you know, human power to do both at the same time at that level of speed, I think is going to be difficult. I don't know if there's going to be shifts, but I'd rather make it something more meaningful going along. I don't know if there's maybe any critical need gaps that we want to focus on, if there's new requests. I mean, Karen, are you looking for data on continuing programs as well as for any new requests, or what is due earliest?
I mean, I think we have a pretty good handle on what we currently fund as far as making recommendations to continue. I do have one program. I do have one program that I'm considering a shift because we've seen very low referrals. So it's the CABI program. We've seen very low referrals into that program. And I would be looking to, you know, is that something that we want to continue and kind of give it CPR and do another bid for a different organization to perform that service? Right now, it's 3 organizations performing that service. So do we give that CPR and kind of like massage that into a program, or is there a need that is greater in our community that I would be recommending shifting that program to meet another need in the system? You know, so all of that has to go through the decision-making process. I have to have the data, I have to support the decision. It has to be submitted with my budget in February, and then I have to justify it during my budget hearing in June. So nothing would be, but I have to have the information to be able to shift it. And it would be a big shift if we're moving CABI to, let's just say, increasing shelter. Like it's a decision package in front of the board.
Is the CABI program the one that's like the high utilizer program?
No.
What's the priority population?
It's this was a federal grant it's kind of like permanent supportive light. So it's once a family or individual is housed and they're housed like scattered site, it's wraparound services to keep them housed. So it's substance use and mental health services and case management. But we've had very, very, very low referrals to this program, and it's a pretty robustly funded program. It's like $700,000, give or take.
That's unfortunate that it hasn't been used a little more.
Yes.
Wondering if that could be a highlighted program for one of the Tuesday night HLA trainings where there's a bunch of different entities.
Have to decide if we're gonna, so that's part of the decision making we have to do. Are we gonna try to push more people to it? Then we're gonna rebid the same structure. Like we have to rebid it this year, or we have to shift the funding. And our procurements take 6 months. So like I have probably 30 days to make this decision, which is why I was hoping that we would have these priority interventions kind of outlined. So I mean, it's not all about me. I mean, like if, you know, I still believe there's a need for case management and services field-based for families that were previously homeless and now housed. So we can rebid the service. So we would have a new provider or providers in October of 26. But I don't know that I want to state that's our plan. If there's 150 families waiting for shelter, which I don't have that data, and I could shift the funding there. So I'm just, you know, this is important information to have when we're trying to budget. Yeah. And like Helen, you know, our social action funding always, you know, there's 5 priorities for that. Homeless is always one of them, but the priority interventions can help that board with their scoring. So that's okay. And that's $1.7 million for the future, but that's beyond budget season. That's after. So that's like March, April.
It seems like, especially looking at the, you know, the if we're trying to help people get out of shelters and not recidivize, like, and it ties in with the housing first, the potential chronic homeless population, especially if there's not PSH available, that it's the interim between the two. I would rather see something like that get revived and figure out how to connect, you know, how we can all help connect better to that program and fully utilize it versus it going away. But I don't know how we do that as a group per se for that.
What is, I'm looking at everybody else who's got their hand. Nobody does. Okay. I don't think it's unrealistic. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you think it would be more confusing, or you can see us getting down a rabbit hole, which I can see in a lot of topics at a board of directors meeting. But if the survey comes back and the HLA staff can compile it about interventions, and we can at least show the results of the survey, the compilation of comments and all that business, and some prioritized or what got the most votes or whatever, so that our funders here have an idea whether or not it's been discussed robustly at a joint funders providers and made a recommendation. But what's the point of having it come back at 9 a.m. on the 6th if we're not going to be utilizing it at the next board of directors meeting? I just think Karen's point and others who are going to take information back to their, elected officials who are going back to talk about budgets need to have this information. Helen, first.
I'm
You're
sorry.
muted.
You would think by this time I would have this right, but I'm using my phone because we just finished an event. So the one thing that I will ask, and how far in advance does the board of directors get their packet? Because that 5 days might be for naught because they have their packet already, and we might not be able to have that discussion. And if I remember correctly, it was to get it back in January. We have a joint meeting in February. Or maybe we have a funders council meeting in February. We have a joint meeting. I don't have it right in front of me coming up, but help me out here, Victoria.
Can I respond? Okay,
Sure,
thank you.
sure.
Thank you. So the board of directors packet goes out a week beforehand. So that will go out on the 3rd of January. So if we want data compiled and sent to the board of directors, I would have to ask that that information be collected by 9 a.m. at least the day before. So on the 2nd of January would be the cutoff so that our team has time to compile it, put it into the packet and send it to the board of directors on the 3rd. So that's a decision that can be made here. And then the other question, Helen, I'm so sorry. I just forgot your other question.
When our joint
Thank you.
funders providers meeting would be.
Thank you. So there is a joint meeting in the 2021 schedule in the 2025 schedule for April, but the Providers Council had requested that we look at potential dates for a joint meeting in January, and that's the reason for that January 6th deadline, so that we could look at an additional joint meeting in January for Providers and Funders Council, as we were not able to meet in October because of the hurricanes. So that's
what I thought I heard them say. That's what I thought the request was. But and I will also add to that the chances of everybody being back around the holiday at that time. So we have our priority populations, right? And if that's what we're going to go with, and that was a lot of work to get to that. That took us a lot of time and a lot of conversation and some pushback because of things that we didn't know. And so that will help us with our funding needs to some extent, but that's the reason why we asked for it to happen in October. We know why it didn't. The interventions, I think that will help. Karen, is our rapid rehousing, is that 2027?
Yeah.
And then, so I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think we're okay on rapid rehab, the collab. Yeah.
Okay.
Then I think I don't want to push something that requires other people to have more like bigger discussions, if that makes sense. So if we have the priority populations and that's what we use this year, that's fine. I'm like Karen, I'm having to reevaluate some dollars in different areas. But if we say that these are the priority populations and that's what we have to go on, then that's what we'll try to push those dollars towards. But we are trying to reevaluate some funding that we have.
Oh, Aaron, go ahead.
So I just want to be careful and clarify a couple things. If you need data, we could publish the data and then you could make decisions with data. If you need the COC to make recommendations and then you have data, that's the problem, right? Because what needs to happen is this survey is a joint survey between the two committees. So these two committees have to meet and make decisions, make recommendations for the entire COC, and Chair Beckman, what could happen is both these committees could, by motion, say, we don't have to meet again. Whatever the data says, we're just going to let the COC EC decide. Again, that could happen. It just gets complicated by the 10th.
Yeah. I think hopefully, Arrow, I'll get right to you, but hopefully we can talk about what the HLA staff has seen with responses at the 10th, at the meeting on the 10th.
Right.
And then the joint meeting later in June or January, they can do with it, as they.
Yeah. And we can always publish the data, right? And then people can see what the data said if we have it in January and then go from there. Exactly.
And anyone can attend any meeting. So anyone can attend the provider funder joint meeting in January.
That's a very good point.
Arrow?
I agree, because almost the data should be driving the priorities to some extent. A couple years ago with COVID, there was like a 2-pager maybe put together, like a back-to-back page of kind of the state of the system to let elected officials know where everything's at. And so I think something to that level would be really helpful, like just, prior year, current year data for individuals homeless, how many are waiting for rapid rehousing, PSH, and so forth, how many are enrolled in the programs. Obviously there were some PIT recommendations already made out of there, but maybe there's a couple key indicators from PIT, like if we're seeing an increase in whatever the thing is, whatever population it is, and just have like an executive summary, a state of the system. That's the key data points. I don't know, Karen and Helen and everyone, what you guys think about that, if that would really help kind of give a snapshot of the system for you guys.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. That is part of the decision making we use within the department. So right now my decision is I have to figure out CABI. So that's kind of the biggest one that I'm going to be looking at as far as this budget cycle. So we'll be we have to make the decision. Are we going to bid it out and keep that going, or is there data that would lead us to make the decision that we would look at changing it? So that is a helpful piece of information. I think the status of the system would be helpful.
Fantastic. I think that's all good. Arrow, is your hand still up or are you good? Okay. All right. I think we got a plan going forward. Do you feel clear on that, Victoria? You good with that?
I think so. I think so. If you want, I'll do a quick review of what Arrow just said so y'all can let me know if I missed anything. So we are looking for HLA to compile some short, quick reference data for 2023 versus 2024, and executive summary state of the system for PSH and RRH quite specifically, and then how many are waiting versus enrolled, as well as PIT recommendations and key indicators.
I would also include how many are active. I know it would be at a shot in time, but with our street outreach teams, some data, and maybe it's not the current amount, but maybe it changes and how many are enrolled over street outreach. I think having the recidivism data and the number of days to housed is also, some of the key indicators you guys have on your dashboards for quarterly, but just from the past year, what those look like, because I think that helps elected officials too, if they can see okay, it's taking, you know, the amount of time to get people rehoused is increasing, or whatever those items may be.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Oh, good. All right. You guys are all so smart and care so much. It's heartwarming. It is. All right. So are we pretty good with the I've got my agenda. Here it is. Okay, with agenda item 5, we're good with that? Oh, Karen, go ahead.
Well, I have to go, but I wanted to say one more thing too. In this kind of status of the system, I also would recommend putting any key recommendations from the task force as it relates to the new law. So if there's anything that rises to the top or has risen to the top from those task force meetings, or something for funders to consider, I would list it as an option as well.
Good. Good point.
And then I'm sorry, is there anything else we need to vote on? Because I have a meeting I have to go to at 10:30.
We don't have anything else to vote on. Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for attending. Appreciate it. All right. So we're at agenda item 6. Any further items to discuss, or items to share? Good news, questions, suggestions? No? All
Chair
right.
Beckman?
Yes.
So sorry. I just wanted to remind everybody that point in time volunteer recruitment has started. If you would like, and we will send this information out to the entire council probably today, maybe tomorrow, but probably today. But please have your team sign up. Please sign up. Ask your family and your friends to register for PIT. It is January 30th. Shifts are only 3 hours and training is only 1 hour and can be done virtually. I am putting the link to that volunteer registration in the chat. Please make sure you click on it, you share it, and I will, of course, ensure that you have the information on how to share this via social media and whatnot in email shortly. Of course, let me know if you have any questions about the point in time count.
All right.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for ordering. Yep. All good. All good. Well, I hope everyone has a great holiday, and welcome, Aaron. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to working with you moving forward. And yeah, have a great week and good holiday.
Thank you, Chair Beckman, for stepping up in the chair role without a chair of this council.
No problem. Take care, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Special thanks to Arrow.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.